So the galaxy is an unforgiving and dangerous place. That's why you need your very own B01 tactical helmet to help keep your noodle and your family safe, because you never know when a bot drop or bug breach can happen. In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can make one for yourself. So let's get started. So if you don't know what exactly this helmet is, this is the B01 tactical helmet from the current popular online game, Helldivers 2. And while this isn't a gaming channel, so I'm not really going to dive into the game itself too much, got you there. Helldivers 2 is an online co-op squad-based game. You drop in, smash some bugs, blow up some toasters, complete some objectives, and get the heck out before things get too hairy. It's a great game. I'm having a ton of fun playing it. But one thing that I'm actually really hyped about for the game itself is just the aesthetics of the game. It has a very, very consistent theme when it comes to the design of the creatures, the planets, the environments, but especially the armors within the game. And they've got a very much Starship Troopers, Halo ODST kind of vibe to them, but with their own spin on them. And luckily, because of one, how popular the game is, and two, and how great the models themselves look, there's a ton of available models out there now for those that want to build some of their own armors and other things from the game itself. So we're going to start with the B01 tactical helmet, and I'm going to show you how you can make one. So first things first, before you can actually print your helmet, you're gonna have to get the files for it, and you can get the files from multiple different sources, and I went with Galactic Armory. I'll have a link in the description. It's not sponsored or affiliated or anything, but I have used Galactic Armory in the past for my Heavy Mando suit. Those are mostly Galactic Armory files as well, and I like the way they do the models. So I downloaded my files from Galactic Armory, and then I got to print it, and I actually printed the helmet twice. First, I printed at 100% scale. I taped it all together, I tried it on my head, and I looked like a bobblehead. One problem that I notice happens a lot with at-home cosplay is people print helmets and make helmets bigger than they need to. It's always nice to have a comfortable helmet with tons of room. The problem is you end up looking like a bobblehead if the helmet's too big, and I really don't like the bobblehead look. So I reprinted the helmet at a slightly smaller scale. The original model is designed with a 24-inch circumference on the head. My head is 22.5 inches, so I scaled it to, I think, 94%, and that worked out pretty well, although it is a little tight, and we had to do a little bit of cheating, so we'll get to that later. Now, when it comes to print settings, I like to print my cosplay stuff a little bit sturdier than most, so I do 3 or 4 walls, 25% infill, usually 4 or 5 top and bottom. I'd rather it be a little bit heavier and be a little bit more rigid and robust, especially when you're working on it, sanding it and whatnot, than it be a little bit lighter and risk breaking. So that's just what I do. And of course, I print everything in ABS or ASA, simply for the fact that I like working with that material better. It's easier to post-process. It's way easier to sand by itself, and you can acetone weld it or attach stuff together with like 3D glue. Now, because a lot of cosplay stuff has curves and weird shapes, you probably are gonna have to print stuff with supports. Depends on your printer, depends if you can fit stuff in full pieces or if you're gonna have to slice it up. So I'm not gonna dive into all the specific settings that I use, but after you get everything printed, clean up your supports, clean up any brim or flashing, then you're ready to start post-processing. And this is the part of the build that is the most time-consuming and is the most annoying. So I have a specific way of post-processing. Normally, I like taking the parts fresh out of the printer and going right to sanding, or at least doing one sanding pass before doing any priming or filling. With this helmet, I tried something a little bit different. The first thing I did was put 2 heavy coats of primer filler, and you can get primer filler that uses airbrushes. I just went with the rattle can method, simply for the fact that I don't have an airbrush set, but I do need to get one because doing these kind of projects with rattle cans gets expensive really quick, actually. You'd be surprised. So I went with a heavy coat primer filler, and then I hit it immediately with my Black & Decker mouse, which is an electric sander. And I like using this for the first and sometimes second pass of sanding, simply for the fact that it just knocks down those high edges really quick. It's really good for giving that first once over to just, you know, get it down, get it smooth, quick. Now with ABS, it is a little bit more temperature resistant than some other plastics, so you can really go at it, but don't hit one area too hard too quickly or you'll end up actually melting the plastic, which isn't good. And after that first pass is done, make sure everything's nice and clean, and then I go in with Bondo glazing putty, and I use that to fill in any areas that are very rough. So vertical surfaces on 3D printed objects usually aren't too bad, but it's areas like on the top here where you start getting some really noticeable layer lines, overhangs. That's where you're gonna notice you're gonna have to do a lot more work to get things smoothed. And unfortunately with this armor, I couldn't cheat like I did with my heavy Mando suit and use some sort of texture because the models in game are nice and smooth. So I had to go and put in the elbow grease to get everything nice and smooth on my helmet. So primer, sanding, filler, primer, sanding, filler. Just keep repeating the cycle. Keep repeating the cycle until you get it to the point where you're happy with the helmet. So after the first few passes with the electric sander, I started hand sanding, different grits, use finer grits as you get closer to being finished. And the last thing I do is a wet sand with a high grit sandpaper. I think I use 320 or 400. And that just goes and gives it one last smooth over before you go ahead and get it ready for paint. Now, when it comes to assembly, there are a few different schools of thought. I'm personally of the belief it's a lot easier to post-process parts before attaching them together. It just makes it a little bit easier to get in some of the little nooks and crannies, and handling may be a little bit easier. Again, depends on the design of the part. And that's what I did for this helmet. There's 3 main parts to this helmet and then some smaller glue-on details. But for the 3 main parts, I post-processed everything separately. And then before painting, I attached 2 of them together. So the front part here is actually not firmly attached, and that's for sizing reasons, but the top and the back here, these are actually separate parts, and I glued them together. Now, you do have a few different ways of attaching plastic parts. Since this is ABS, I could have just acetone welded it or used something like 3D gloop here. But since everything was post-processed and there was paint and Bondo, you weren't gonna get a clean surface to use those adhesives. So what I did was pretty simple. I just used hot glue from a hot glue gun to just kind of hold everything in place in its final position. And then I went through and just used epoxy on the whole seam. So I just got everything in the position I wanted with hot glue, made sure I was happy with the alignment, and then I filled the entire joint in with epoxy, and this is gonna be the last thing that breaks on it. So after that was done, it was time to paint. Now, when it comes to painting, you have several different options. You could paint this bright fluorescent pink if you wanted to. If that's your goal, go for it. But I wanted something a little bit more screen accurate. So I went with metallic black stainless from Krylon, again in the rattle can, and then I heavy weathered it. So after several coats of paint, and again, when you're applying your final color, light coats. It's better to do many light coats than few heavy coats. It'll also help with running. After you do your painting, I go ahead and do any accent paints. So for these yellow stripes here, I just masked it off with masking tape, sprayed that with some yellow paint. Again, Krylon Gloss Sunbeam is the yellow I used. And there's several different designs. I used an in-game model-inspired paint scheme for my accents. You could do whatever design you want. If you want a yellow mohawk down the center, you do you. It's your helmet. And then for these accent pieces here, I just used a stainless silver paint that I had. I think it might have been Krylon. I don't know where the can went, but a silver stainless for those. Glued them on, super glue and epoxy. Used the right glue for the right location. And then for these other little areas, I just used a paintbrush and again some silver paint for that. And then I like to dry brush my models. So I don't have an airbrush, so I can't do airbrushing fine detail, but I do want to put some kind of scuff marks on it. Make it look like, it's a helmet. It's been to a war zone. It's been bashed around. So I use a technique called dry brushing. That's where you use a small paintbrush with very short, very stiff bristles. You put just a little bit of paint on it. So what I do is I dab it in the paint and then you dab it in like a cloth or something. So there's barely any paint on the bristles themselves. And then you just kind of go around and do little streaks on, ridges, edges. I put scuff marks, make it look like, ricochets or, Helldivers dive around a lot. So you're gonna have a lot of bumps and scratches on your bucket. So go around, put any wear you want on it. If you wanna do a pristine look, don't bother with that. If you wanna do, some bug guts or some oil, you do you. Make it, it's your helmet. Customize it the way you want. And after all that is done, then I go in and I do the weathering. And for that, I use a very, very simple method, and it's just a wash. And all that is a cup of black acrylic paint and water diluted. So it's, I don't know what the exact ratio is, 1 to 4, 1 to 5, I don't know. Just put a little bit of water, put a bunch of black paint, stir it up, and then just dab it over the entire helmet. I just use a paper towel for that. Let it dry for a minute or two, just let it set a bit, then go again and dab it again. And just do that several times and you get this nice kind of weathered look. It makes the helmet look like it's been, you know, it's been through a few drops. It's, you know, the yellow is nice and dirtied up. It gives your exhausts a little bit of wear to them. I like to use the brush to make sure that it's heavy in the little corners and little divots, you know, areas where you think grime would build up in a helmet. You're gonna be a little bit heavier there with your weathering. Again, there is no real set way to do this. If you have different techniques or you're inspired by different ways of doing things, do it that way. It's your helmet. And after the painting is done, the weathering is done, it's time for the final assembly. So the first thing I had to do was attach this front piece. And because I scaled this for 94%, this helmet actually doesn't fit on my head. Joy hatless me for a second here. It's tight, and I probably could get it if I really forced it, but getting it off would suck. So what I did was, and I totally stole this trick from Galactic Armory's instructional video, by the way. I just used elastic bands here. So I used hot glue. I glued one side, let it dry, pulled it tight, glued it onto the other side of the armor. And then I used one more piece here that's only glued on one sides of the armor, so you don't get any light escape from there. And that allows the helmet to pivot in the front here. So I can put it on. And the last thing we have to install on this helmet is the lens itself, because you don't want bot oil getting in your eyes during an extraction there. And when it comes to this lens, I've got a story for you, because this dumb lens cost me 2 days of work, and that was because I tried to vacuum form the lens. As you can see, this lens is not vacuum formed. We'll talk about it in a second. But I tried to vacuum form the lens, and it kind of went okay, and then it didn't. So what happened? Well, first thing first, to do some vacuum forming, you need a vacuum former. I don't have one, so I built one. Now, luckily, I had a bunch of scrap wood on hand, so it didn't really cost me anything other than time to make one. You just make a wooden box. I used some silicone around all the seams to make sure no air would escape. Drill a hole in the side to stick your vacuum hose in, and drill a bunch of holes on top so that it basically a reverse air hockey table, so it sucks the air down. Put a little gasket around the outside, boom, you got a vacuum former. Nothing complicated there. But when it came to actually vacuum forming the lenses, first thing was you need a specific kind of plastic. I kind of figured you could use pretty much any plastic, so I bought some PET sheets off Amazon. Yeah, they don't work. They turn opaque. They don't work. Basically, as soon as I got them hot enough to start forming, yeah, they went from clear to opaque and you couldn't see through them. Apparently, you need PETG sheets of plastic, which I can find on Amazon Canada, but they're 5 inches by 5 inches, which is too small for the lens. McMaster Car has them, and it would have cost me probably $50 to $80 to get one sheet of plastic. So, yeah. Also, my plan for tinting, I figure, you know what, I remember the kiddies back when I was in high school, they used this stuff called nightshade to tint their headlights on their 99 Honda Civics, because that was cool back then. So I figured, you know what, I'll vacuum form the lens, and then I'll just tint it with some spray on nightshade. That'll be nice and easy. I don't have to fiddle with dyeing or whatever, so I bought the can of nightshade. So after the vacuum forming failed, I figured, you know what, I'll just take the last sheet of clear plastic here, I'll just spray it with nightshade, and I'll just cut a hole out, and I'll use that to make the lens. And unfortunately, that was a really bad idea, because while this actually looks pretty good from this side, this is the side you spray, and when you look through it, I don't know if you could see on camera, the image is blurry as heck. So not only is it really dark and tinted, which is what you kind of want, because you don't want to see the eyes through the lens, the image looks like somebody slapped welding goggles on your head and smeared the lenses with Vaseline. It would give me a headache after wearing this for 5 minutes, and it did. So I busted out the credit card again, I hit up Amazon again, and I went back to good old reliable welding lens replacement. And that's what I used. It's the same stuff I used in the Mando helmet. And hey, you know what? Yeah, it's missing some details. There's supposed to be like a little ridge under the eyes and a little bump here, but you know what? It's good enough. So I went with that. And of course, just to make sure the bucket fits a little bit better on my noodle, I put a little foam on the inside so that holds it in place when I wear it and it doesn't rattle around like a bobblehead. So yeah, that's how I made my B01 tactical helmet. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel because you don't want to miss out, because after making this one helmet here, you know what? I'm gonna make the whole suit. Yeah, I know I have the T45 power armor. That's currently on hiatus because I just don't have enough room to do a project that big right now. Waiting for the weather to get nicer so I can, you know, sand outside. But some Helldivers tactical armor is a much smaller project. And hey, look, I've got everything printed already. So I guess this week I'm working on some democratic sanding along with some potential freedom bondoing as well. So if you want to help support the channel, the content I create, and the things I do, check out the links in the description. Some of them are affiliate links. Go a long way in supporting the channel. Don't cost you anything extra. While you're down there, don't forget to like that smash button. If you have any questions or concerns or comments, leave them in the comments below. So yeah, don't forget to squish some bugs, spill some oil, and spread some managed democracy. Cheers.